Welcome to Conversations with Dr. Stephen Greer, and I am Dr. Greer, and I'm joined today by Dr. Ted Loder, the Science Advisor for the OrionProject.org and Disclosure Project. And I'd like to thank the people at the World Puja Network for hosting us here every 2 weeks and allowing us to keep you up to date on what all our projects are doing. Thanks, Ted, for joining us.
Well, good afternoon, Steve. It's good to be back on the World Puja Network.
Yeah, this is going to be an exciting sort of hour to focus on what has just happened. As many people know, we had a large conference in Rio Rico, Arizona, a couple of weeks ago, and during the first day of that conference, I released to the conference and then on the Internet the special presidential briefing for President Barack Obama that we were asked to put together shortly after he became president. And this document is at disclosureproject.org, and it is there as a PDF file. Then you can read the entirety of the summary. And I'm going to go through some parts of it. I wanted to explain to people sort of how this came to be, and then we're going to go into some of the history of the Disclosure Project, which, as you all know, has launched the worldwide disclosure movement that's going on in every country, as well as the exopolitics movement. And I wanted to give people some deep background, but also connect the dots as to how that has brought us to this juncture, where we have this new president, where we're trying to get some forward momentum on ending the secrecy related to advanced energy and propulsion systems, the extraterrestrial presence, and the entire UFO subject. So, I guess to start with this, to start way back, I want to give some people some deep background that's in my book, Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge. It's sort of an autobiography that I wrote a couple of years ago about this, and it's you can get that at disclosureproject.org. And I described this series of events that happened, and Ted will pick up in a minute here. But if we start this, back in 1990, I founded the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, or CSETI, CSETI.org, and we started it as an effort to initiate a bilateral or multilateral diplomatic contact between humans and these interstellar civilizations that are visiting the planet, and through the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind initiative, which is when we train people to, in a number of protocols, which we've discussed before on this show, to go out and make contact as sort of a prototype for diplomatic contact and initiative. And by 1992, we had a number of astonishing contact events, which are actually documented in the new book that was just released at this Rio Rico conference called Contact, Countdown to Transformation. And it has with it a DVD that has the images and the tones of the contact events that we've been having for the last 18 years or so. And you can order that also at disclosureproject.org. Now, what's interesting is that as soon as we began that project, we began having contact in Florida near Pensacola, in Mexico, in England, where we had fully materialized craft appearing in the sky and hovering right above the ground, making contact with us. And I was approached then at that point by the former head of Army Intelligence and some other people who were rather concerned that we had figured out the Rosetta Stone of contact, and that they were protocols that did work and that were effective and were resulting in mass witness events. For example, in Florida in the spring of 1992, and the videotape of this is on this DVD that you get for free with this new book that came out, we had 4 of these extraterrestrial vehicles appear in the sky, signaling to us, witnessed by about 50 people on the ground or at the beach where we were. And there were at least 3 Air Force officers and pilots who were there, and it was filmed also by people, ended up on the front page of the Pensacola paper the next day. So this began to get some real attention, and then in 1993 these continued, these sort of contacts, and we had some astonishing events happen over by the large volcano in Mexico, Popocatépetl, and we had that event resulted in a massive triangular craft that came very close to us, and on it went. Well, by 1993 in the summer, and this would be July of 93, after we'd had multiple events, including the 1992 near landing in Alton Barnes, England, where a 100-foot diameter disc craft hovered right about 10 feet above the ground in a field where we had made contact. I was concerned that our ability to make this sort of contact was proceeding, but that the governments of the world and the public in general were not informed properly on the subject, nor was there any official governmental corollary for this diplomatic contact. The State Department wasn't doing anything, the United Nations wasn't, and nor was any other foreign ministry around the world, and that we felt that it was time for this information to be provided to the government and to encourage them to step out ahead of this and end the secrecy and begin disclosing this information to the public and making contact openly with these extraterrestrial civilizations. One of the reasons we wanted to do this, and this was on the advice of our military advisor, who I prefer not to name, but he felt that the military, who were watching what we were doing, and which we knew they were at that point, could interfere with these events, and that we needed to, as he would word it in sort of military jargon, deconflict agendas so that we could proceed without any problems. And so we had a meeting here in Virginia. I was living in North Carolina at the time, and we actually ended up meeting right there near the Monroe Institute in Virginia, where I live very close to that facility now. And there were, I guess maybe 10 or 12 people that we gathered there, including my military advisor and some people who'd worked for the State Department and some other people who had government connections. And it was decided that we should launch an initiative to brief people within the government and to encourage disclosure and to end the secrecy, and also to encourage official contact, because we were doing this, of course, as a citizens' diplomacy effort. Well, by 1993, when we had decided to do this, we were getting a lot of contacts of people who were following this. As it turned out, a man who was very good friends with the new president, the Clinton CIA director, Jim Woolsey, a man who was very good friends with Jim Woolsey, was following our work, and had actually written a manual for the military on sort of wild cards of futuristic things that might happen in the future. And one of them was that a group of people, civilians, made contact with an ET civilization on a beach in Florida. And he was basing it on what had happened with our group in 1992 down near Pensacola, Florida, on the Gulf Coast of Florida. And this actually went all through the Department of Defense and was written up under contract by them as sort of something they should have a heads up on. It turns out I did not know this was being done. This was being done without my knowledge. And this man came to a lecture I gave in the fall of 1993 with astronaut Brian O'Leary and Maury Albertson, who co-founded the Peace Corps, and a number of other futuristic thinkers in Fort Collins, Colorado. And during that meeting, I gave a talk, a keynote address, where I described this initiative to take our CSETI contact, a diplomatic contact program, and begin to brief governments of the world and to encourage them to end the secrecy and to make open contact and to bring out this information to the public. So that was in the fall of 1993. Well, as it turned out, this man who was friends with the CIA director came up to me after this talk and said, well, Dr. Greer, I think you're right. It is time for this to happen, and I want to help you, and I feel that God wants me to help you. And he was very sincere about this. He says, and I know a few folks in Washington who I think can help with this. And I said, well, who would that be? He says, well, I'm friends with the new director of Central Intelligence of the CIA. And I said, well, that's a start. He said, well, would you be willing to come to Washington and brief the CIA director on this because he and the president can't find out anything about this. And, of course, I was sort of stunned, and I said, certainly, set it up, and we'll make it happen. So between September and December of 1993, I proceeded back and forth. We looked at different dates and tried to deconflict my schedule as a full-time emergency doctor and a father of 4 children, young children at the time, and the schedule for the CIA director. And we came up that December 13th of 1993, we would meet with the CIA director, the cover story being a dinner party at this man's house, who was our go-between. Now, prior to this, or around this time, this man, who was head of a D.C. area think tank, and I settled on the name Project Starlight. And that was the initial name for the Disclosure Project in the early days in 1993. And actually, if you look, the Associated Press reported earlier this year that from the Clinton Library, they had released some documents concerning Project Starlight, briefing the White House and the Clinton administration on the UFO subject, and that's a matter of public record, and you can go Google that and look it up. Now, what's interesting is at this point, I ended up getting a FedEx letter from this friend of the CIA director, Jim Woolsey, that said very clearly in writing that I would be the first person to brief this administration and the CIA director on this subject. And I thought this was sheer fantasy, if not a prevarication designed to just basically have them find out as an intelligence gathering operation what I was doing. And I didn't really believe that at that time. I was naive about this. I didn't believe that the president and the CIA director would be denied access to the so-called majestic programs, the classified operation dealing with this subject. And so I had to go through quite a steep learning curve myself, which you have all heard me speak about since then, and which is outlined very detailed in this book, Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, which is sort of my autobiography on this issue. Now, during this same period, in the fall of 1993, a couple of other interesting things happened. I was invited to Lawrence Rockefeller's ranch, the JY Ranch out in the Tetons, to meet with a whole lot of intelligence people and other people in the UFO community to discuss these issues. And that's when I announced to them that we were doing this initiative. And, of course, you could have heard a pin drop at this meeting at the Rockefeller Ranch when we were putting this together. And another event that happened around this same time is that friends of the Secretary General of the United Nations at the time surfaced and wanted me to provide information to them. And this is Boutros Ghali at the time, was the UN Secretary General. And so the network just kept growing and growing and growing. The genesis of it, this is what everyone needs to understand, was contact. They knew, and they knew it because we had the video evidence and 50 witnesses in Florida, but also at these other events. They knew that we had figured out the Rosetta Stone of how to make open contact with these extraterrestrial civilizations. That's what gave rise to the Disclosure Project. A lot of people don't realize that. I want to be very clear on this. And it was taken extremely seriously within these senior circles. It gets laughed at in some circles and sort of the puffery of the UFO subculture. But in reality, within very high circles of the U.S. government, intelligence community, and political sphere, as well as the international political community at the UN and elsewhere, this was taken extremely seriously and with great interest. Now, what ended up happening, of course, is it's all history now. This meeting with the CIA director lasted almost 3 hours, and I found out, in fact, he was being denied access to these projects and was devastated, almost in tears over it. That the president and he had tried to get access to these UFO-related programs, and they knew they existed. They didn't doubt they existed at all, but they didn't have access. And it was a very emotional and very devastating meeting, in a sense, for me personally, to realize the extent to which our government, the constitutional government of we the people, had been an end run had been done around them. To the extent that to what Eisenhower warned us about, that the military-industrial complex could just break away and engage in such secrecy that it would undermine our democracy and our institutions and even our way of life. And as Eisenhower said that, his words were very accurate. So what ended up happening as a consequence of this is that we began to put together big assessments for, very thorough research documents and what we call the best available evidence for the President, the National Security Advisor, Tony Lake, his science advisor, and a number of other, Jack Gibbons, and a number of other people in the Clinton administration. And the Rockefeller, Lawrence Rockefeller, became involved also in helping to get this information to the Clintons. Eventually hosted the Clintons at the JY Ranch, where he was given a lot of these case materials and things that I had conceived of and named and best available evidence, and which were taken back into the White House. However, by 1994, in the winter, I had a friend of the President's visit me at my home and said, Dr. Greer, we're very supportive of what you're recommending. Everyone feels that this should be disclosed. However, we're convinced that the President will end up like Jack Kennedy if he does what you're suggesting. And I laughed. I thought he was joking. And it turns out he was not. And this was another devastating moment. Of course, he said this at our dining room table with my children there, and I said, well, let's talk about this later. But it turned out that there was serious concern that some rogue element would actually assassinate the President if he tried to take on their policy of global secrecy on this issue. Because if the issue is disclosed, people are going to say, well, how are these UFOs moving silently around our atmosphere? And when that is asked, it'll be answered. When it's answered, it'll be the end of oil and gas and coal and nuclear power and central utilities, and boom, there just went $600 trillion in commodities and assets. So I think that one of the things that we realized very early on is that the special interests, if we can call them that, the 8,000-pound gorilla sitting out there is the financial and petrodollar and industrial and energy sectors that don't want this information out. And many of the political leaders are favorable to it, but they are sort of the emperor that has no clothes. And so with that information, we found out that the President, and we later found out that Hillary Clinton had actually stopped the briefing process at the Rockefeller Ranch because she thought it was too dangerous and did not want to proceed with this whole initiative any further. Now, this then led to, by 1997, going forward a few years. Now, there's a lot of information I'm leaving out, but it'd take hours for me to go through all the details of this. I decided that, look, let's try to then, if the executive branch, meaning the President's administration of the Clintons, wouldn't do this, let's see if Congress will. Let's see if we can find some congressmen to get educated on this and who would have the courage to hold open hearings where they could have some of our military and intelligence witnesses, some of whom had been in very top-secret settings, and where they had documents to prove what they had seen and what have you, could be put under oath and testify before a committee and open testimony in Congress, which would actually lift the lid of secrecy as easily as an executive order. So in 1997, April of 97, we decided to have an event in Washington where we would gather together congressional committee members and members of Congress, as well as people from the Vice President, Al Gore's office, and the President's office, and the Department of Defense, to do a briefing in Washington, where we would have, I think it was about a dozen of these military witnesses, as well as astronaut Ed Mitchell and a few other people, to testify to the reality of the matter and to give their testimony and to encourage these hearings. And this was a private, closed meeting at the Westin Hotel in Georgetown that we founded or initiated, and actually one of the invited guests was Dr. Ted Loder, who's on the phone now with me. And Ted, I know it's interesting for you to tell your story of how you came to get involved in all this.
Okay, well, very briefly, you've done all the background. My involvement started as a child, basically being very interested in these issues, but never having anybody give me the clue that things were really real and people were really, really seeing things. It was it wasn't until my cousin, Brigadier General Stephen Lovkin, who was one of our witnesses, told me about the reality of this stuff in December of '96. And he told me he was going to be at a briefing in Washington, D.C., the one Dr. Greer just mentioned. And I said, boy, I want to come to that. And so I ended up calling Dr. Greer and introducing myself out of the blue, and said, I want to come to this meeting. My cousin's going to be one of the witnesses, and I understand this is real, and I'm very excited about hearing this stuff. And he said, that's impossible. It's a closed briefing for the members of Congress and the various folks that Dr. Greer just mentioned. And I said, well, what if the governor of New Hampshire appointed me as I came as her official representative? The governor at the time was Governor Gene Shaheen, who's now our senator, our junior senator from New Hampshire, Democrat. And he said, well, that would be fine because I'd be representing an official government person. And so I contacted then Governor Shaheen, and after several months
of senator, by the way.
Pardon? Yes, who's now our senator. But anyway, I contacted her, and I said, I'd have some very interesting information to share with you, and I'd like to go to this meeting in D.C. And after a couple of months of briefing her staff and getting materials from Dr. Greer to give them and back and forthing, she finally appointed me. I have an official letter on her letterhead appointing me as her representative in Washington, D.C., and lo and behold, I went to the meeting, and it was my first chance to really meet Edgar Mitchell, as well as a group of the witnesses, and really learn firsthand what was going on. It was incredibly exciting for me, and I've been involved heavily ever since. Once you've actually met people who have the bona fides and who have been either in the military or government at high levels with access to information, talking about the reality of this, there's no going back. You now understand and get it, and then the issue is to figure out what to do with that information, how to share it, and how to move forward in terms of making it more open and public. And that's what I've been working on for the last 12 or so years.
Right, and Ted's been an indispensable part of the team and has stepped into this role very courageously, and I thank him for it. And I think that the other thing to just mention, around this same time, I had been asked by my military advisor to do a briefing for the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the Pentagon, and an admiral. And the day after these meetings that we had with members of Congress, I had that meeting, and I took a couple of these witnesses, including Mr. Lovkin and astronaut Ed Mitchell, to the Pentagon, and we met with this admiral, Admiral Tom Wilson. And what was interesting is that prior to the meeting, I had sent the briefing materials that we had also put together for the President and for members of Congress and what have you, which included a secret National Reconnaissance Office document that I had acquired through contacts that I don't want to discuss, that outlined and listed the project code names and code numbers of some of these Majestic-related projects that were out at Nellis Air Force Base, the so-called Area 51 sector, but also in general. And it listed not only the names, but the project code numbers. And so I gave this document in advance of our meeting to the Admiral, who looked into it and ended up getting hold of one of the very top-secret compartmented operations and was told that basically after he called and said, look, I'm the head of intelligence joint staff and I'm Admiral so-and-so, and they said, yes, we know who you are. And he says, well, I'd like to be read into this project, which means kind of being briefed on it. And they said, well, sir, you don't have a need to know. And this to the guy who's the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the Department of Defense. And he said, well, God damn it, if I don't have a need to know, who does? And they said, sir, we will not discuss this with you further. Click, and they cut the line and blocked it and would not give him any information. So by the time astronaut Ed Mitchell and I and some other people got to this meeting, you can imagine how shaken this admiral was. And I want to, people listening need to understand, I'm working full-time as an emergency doctor. I'm doing all this stuff. sort of as sort of a shuttle diplomacy with all these political leaders, everyone from Senator Claiborne Pell, chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee of the Senate, to the CIA director and what have you. And what I have found was that everyone took it seriously, but they were also in very high positions of responsibility who were being denied access, and that the tight compartmentalization of these operations and the degree to which they had been moved over into the corporate sector under contracting arrangements was such that the presidency and the Congress and even senior people at the Pentagon were simply being denied access. So between 1993 and 1997, I went through this experience, this sort of a trial of fire, as it were, in realizing the extent to which Eisenhower's warning about the excesses of the military-industrial complex coming to pass, and I saw it firsthand. And this is outlined in this book, Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, at disclosureproject.org. Now, what's interesting is that if you now, of course, fast forward a few years, by 1998, one year, I had concluded that neither the Congress nor that administration, the Clinton administration, which of course was in office till January of 2001, was going to do anything about this. That even Congressman Dan Burton, who was chairman of the powerful House Government Reform and Oversight Committee, who was at the briefing and who I met, that we put together for Congress in '97, that Dr. Loder attended, said he wanted everything we had on the matter, and he was extremely interested, but he didn't want to take action because he was going to have to take on too many powerful interests. And so once I concluded that no one in politics had the courage, the moral courage to do this, then we decided in 2001 to launch what probably everyone on this radio show has heard of by now, the Disclosure Project. And you can go to disclosureproject.org, and we came out with the first of 110 different military corporate intelligence witnesses and their documents, testimony, and now I have over 500 such men and women who've been in these programs that give me intelligence and information. And so in a sense, we've become a clearinghouse or a gathering site for this kind of information, and we still invite people who have this sort of information to contact me if they can establish their bona fides. Now, the result of the 2001 event was that there were tens of thousands of people who wrote to Congress and to the President saying, we would like to see this subject disclosed. And then on September 11th of 2001, everyone knows what happened on 9/11, that diverted everyone's attention away from this issue onto these global terrorism issues. So, however, during this period with the National Press Club event we did in 2001, and by the way, you can see some of this online, but you can also get the entire DVD of the witnesses speaking to the world at the National Press Club. This was eventually seen by around 1 billion people worldwide. And so it was such a threat to the status quo that the first hour of that National Press Club event was externally, electronically jammed. This confirmed to me by the president of the hosting company at the National Press Club that was hosting the worldwide web internet broadcast of the press conference. And it was, for a whole first hour of it, it was delayed and stopped. And there are a lot of stories that I go into this book, Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, about this. But the point is that it had a huge effect, and it launched what is now, 8 years later, the global effort for disclosure and exopolitics and ending secrecy. Now, what is interesting is that during the Bush-Cheney years, or I should say the Cheney-Bush years, because Cheney really dealt with mostly the policy issues dealing with secrecy, and Cheney's always been a hardliner about secrecy and has a sort of a fetish about secrecy. We knew there was not much chance to have the executive branch, meaning the White House, the administration, the Bush administration, do anything about this. However, other countries were. And we started seeing an opening up between 1999 and now at the Vatican. I had meetings at the Vatican with senior officials. Last year, the Vatican came out with a statement talking about extraterrestrial life. Same thing with meetings I had with people in Europe. And now we're seeing the Danish government, the French government releasing 100,000 pages of previously classified documents from their space agency. The governments of Chile and Brazil and other countries all releasing documents and all calling for more openness and transparency on the issue. And so that's all building. And in the meanwhile, we have a new president elected. So I'm bringing you back up to 2008. And so one of the things that happened in 2008 was the election of Barack Obama to the presidency. And actually, we were out at Joshua Tree National Park, where we are getting ready to hold a week-long expedition out under the stars, again, in about starting on Sunday, actually. And it turns out that back here at my home office in Virginia, the people who brief the head of state for the G7 country that has been working with us wanting to have open contact with the ETs and have our group, CSETI, lead an initiative to make open contact within their borders and openly, had called up and said, after Obama was elected, he said, "Congratulations to you and to all of mankind. Now maybe we can go forward." And when I spoke with him, he said we need to catch up with 54 years of missing history, the lost history of since 1954, when Eisenhower had a meeting with ETs near Muroc, California, which is near where Edwards Air Force Base is now, which did happen. And actually this aerospace person who briefs the head of state of this G7 country that's very favorable to what we're working on actually sent me an account of a first-hand person's account who was at this meeting between Eisenhower and some ETs. But the military-industrial complex convinced Eisenhower to keep all this secret, and he regretted it, and he lived to regret it. And, of course, 54, now almost 55 years later, here we are. Now, what's interesting is that this led to some people in Washington that I know who are close to the administration and people who know the president and people who are close friends with sort of his inner circle, and said, we need to get some stuff, a really good briefing to the president. And so between November 5th and January 20th, when Obama was inaugurated, I worked on putting together the concept for this. And, of course, luckily, there was a lot more material that we have now than when I first briefed the CIA director and the Clinton administration people back in 93 and 94. So we put a briefing packet together, and then I wrote an overview. And the overview is on the website at disclosureproject.org. and should also be at cseti.org. And in this overview, it really is about a 5 or 6 page summary of everything you would need to know, and a list of executive actions that we're asking the president to fulfill in order to fix this problem, get the information out, begin to get the technologies out, and make open contact with these extraterrestrial visitors in a way that is diplomatic, peaceful, rather than a sort of a paranoid military approach, which is unfortunately what has dominated the Majestic operations over the last 54 years or so. And it's interesting because my family and I were at the inauguration for the president, and when they were kicking off that inauguration week on that Sunday when U.f.o and Bono was there playing at the National Mall, and Usher and Stevie Wonder and everyone else, I was there, one of a million people, of course, there. And I looked up on one of these jumbotrons that they had all over, and the president and the first family sitting there, and up comes this beautiful quote from Robert F. Kennedy from 1966. which I ended up putting on the front special presidential briefing for the president. And it says, and I'm going to read this, few men are willing to brave the disapproval of their fellows, the censure of their colleagues, the wrath of their society. Moral courage is a rarer commodity than bravery in battle or great intelligence. Yet it is the one essential, vital quality for those who seek to change a world which yields most painfully to change. Robert F. Kennedy, 1966. Now, I think that the reason I wanted that quote on there, not only did the president have it up on the jumbotrons, but it really speaks to the heart of what's required if Obama is to do anything on this issue. Because if you look to your own selfish interests, no. I mean, I would have been much better off if I just stayed running an emergency department and had a normal life and a normal income from doing that than what I've taken on with this. There's every kind of risk and every kind of reason why you can make up that from a purely selfish point of view, just steer clear of this stuff. You can also then look at all the special interests that would be upset that you brought this out. I mean, imagine you've got $500 or $600 trillion in derivatives and commodities and futures assets for oil and gas and coal and utilities and all this, dealing with fossil fuels and the status quo of what's destroying the biosphere and keeping the world enslaved in this macroeconomic system that requires that 80% of the world be in poverty. And so you'd have to take that on, because you cannot just say, yes, we're not alone in the universe, and yes, they're here, and yes, these UFO things you see flying around are real, and yes, we do have a classified project that's been building what are called alien reproduction vehicles that are anti-gravity free energy devices since the 50s, because the public's going to say, well, gee, I'd like to have one of those running my car and running my house, so I don't have to pay these utility bills, and so we're not destroying the planet's biosphere. So you can't, there's no way to bring out any part of this without the whole thing coming out. And that is then where you have to have the moral courage to stand up to all the people who are actually pimping for this majestic coalition that are in favor of secrecy. They don't want to rock the boat. They don't want the truth out. And that's where we are today. And that's why when I released this, and it was with some trepidation that I released this. Believe me, this was not a easy decision to release this summary. Now, I have to point out that the summary itself, which is 6 pages, is just my overview and the recommendations of action for the president. The actual briefing document is thousands of pages and DVDs full of material and witness testimony and government documents and all of that. That we have not released yet because it's just a production to get it out there. Some of it, however, is in the DVDs that we already have at disclosureproject.org, and the 2-hour DVD of the witnesses' testimony has a briefing document that Dr. Loder worked on that actually has many of these documents and information in there as part of the DVD, and I encourage people to get that.
In fact, that's if I can butt in a second, that's almost 500 pages of information, and it's very rich with information.
Yeah, it's almost 500 pages on the DVD, in addition to the 2 hours of all the testimony of these top-secret military whistleblowers and witnesses. So it's all out there, and you can order it at disclosureproject.org. I mean, so there's nothing being kept secret here, really. There's some new things we put in, and hopefully at some point we'll be able to get the free time, in my free time, to get that organized, to get out there. You know, it's not like we have an office building here full of staff helping us. This is pretty much a couple people operation here. But I think that what you have to understand is that this is now, all of you listening need to go to disclosureproject.org, read the document, and then write to the president and write to your member of Congress and your 2 senators and ask them that they support disclosure. The reason I released this document is that people close to some senior members of the Congress, including the House Intelligence Committee chairman, and to the president, said that, you know, They need to hear from the public. They need to know that the public cares about this issue. And, Obama was a community organizer in Chicago. This sort of input from the public is very important. And so I would ask that all of you, as soon as that you finish listening to this show, go to disclosureproject.org, read this brief that I put together for the President, and also the cover letter that goes with it that lists the email and phone numbers for the White House and for Congress, and that you contact the President and encourage him to do the right thing and to have the moral courage to do the right thing. Because there are other world leaders in these, around the not just this one G7 country, but a number of places, that are also wanting this to go forward. We're getting indications from a very senior contact in India, for example, that there's widespread support there, also in China, and all over the world. But the crown jewel of the secrecy, because this is where all the money is, the classified programs are, is the United States, to a lesser extent Great Britain and Canada. But the real crown jewel of all this is in the United States. And in this document, one of the things that we provided to the President was the same document I gave to this admiral who was head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, that lists the project code names and code numbers, that gives and also another updated document that I first created in the 1990s for Congressman Christopher Cox of Orange County, and where I'll be speaking, by the way. Any of you who are in Southern California, I'll be speaking on Friday in Costa Mesa. Information there is at disclosureproject.org and cseti.org, and doing a day-long workshop. We're going to go out at night and teach people how to do these contact protocols that launched this whole project back in the 90s. But Congressman Christopher Cox had been a congressman for that district in Orange County, and I met with him personally, and he asked me, what companies and where are these facilities? And no one had ever compiled a comprehensive list. So I did at that time, and now I've updated it for the President. And this includes the sub-facilities at Edwards and in Utah and Australia and Pine Gap and Nellis Air Force Base and the code-numbered subsections in Pahut Mesa and on and on and on. So all this information has been given to the President. He certainly can find out more from there, and if he needs more help, we've offered that help. Because I have many witnesses who've been in these facilities, in the underground facilities, and worked on the projects. And one of the things that we asked the President to do, as many of you who follow the OrionProject.org, is to allow this very accomplished and ingenious scientist who was a year ago going to work with us to bring out at least an energy generation component or prototype so that we could show that energy could be pulled out of the fabric of space-time around us and run, quote, free energy. Even if it's 100 watts of it, it would be enough to prove it. And he had agreed to put together a prototype like that, and then he was suddenly snatched out of his local command and dispatched all over the world, so he couldn't work with us. Big news, he's just surfaced, and he is now wanting to work with us again. So this is a huge story that's just happened in the last 72 hours or so. And we're hopeful that part of the reason that has happened is that there has been enough influence that's come around from this letter, because the letter that went to the President, and also I might add was given to the Secretary of Defense, Bob Gates, and the new CIA Director, Leon Panetta, and the Chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Sylvester Reyes, and the Head of Homeland Security, Napolitano. These copies had the actual full information of who this scientist is, where his team is located, and the fact that they want to bring out these energy technologies with us, but we're being prevented from doing so, and that we were asking that the President and that the full power of the office of the President protect and permit this person to do so. All of a sudden, we get this phone call last week that this person is back and wanting to work with us. It's very exciting. And Ted might comment on.
Well, I was just going to say, I was waiting for you to pause there for a second. It's incredibly exciting. We met with this gentleman a year ago in November, interestingly enough, and at that time he was ready to plow ahead with a proposal and some ideas and a budget and everything else ready to go. And literally within a few days to a week or so after we had made this decision with him, all sitting in a meeting for several days, he contacts us and said, I've been shipped abroad. I will not be able to contact you for almost a year and a half or a year and 16 months or so. And so that was it. There's nothing we could do. And to have him return within a year, basically, a much shorter time than we had expected, telling us that he's ready to work with us and that he's given it's strange how these things work, but people in that sort of status have people who sort of oversee what they do. Shall we say bosses? That's not the term that's used in the industry, but anyway, he said he's been given permission to go ahead and work with us on this technology. So this is very exciting, and it's fortuitous and perhaps not coincidental that this has happened right now.
Well, I'm sure it's not coincidental. I think this letter had its effect. I think the public expressing their concern to the president has had its effect. And I think the fact that we were prepared to go public with this initial letter overview of the subject to the public that was released at the conference in Rio Rico just a couple weeks ago.
2 Saturdays ago, yeah.
That had an enormous effect because it sort of gave a sort of warning that we're going to move forward with more information of not only how this is being kept secret, but what's been provided to the president. There has to be accountability. All of a sudden, this person is brought back virtually in real time while we're releasing this briefing document summary that you can all read at disclosureproject.org, is brought back into the country and is willing to work. And it says that when he left, he said, basically, be very careful, and, I'm worried that there are going to be bullets flying around your heads. And now he's saying it's an all clear and everything is settled down and I can proceed with you. This is a huge sea change. This is an enormous breakthrough.
Exactly.
And so people, if you have folks who know can help us fund this scientific R&D from this man and his team, this is a once-in-a-millennium opportunity to break the sort of death grip of secrecy on these really advanced energy and propulsion systems. And this man is probably our best shot we're going to have in our lifetime to get this stuff out. And you can go to theorionproject.org. That's theorionproject, all one word, .org, and make a contribution so that we can adequately fund and support this research. We do not know the specifics of what he's going to propose, how much it's going to cost, the timeline. None of that is known yet. But please, those of you who can provide support and funding, do so. And those of you who have, an inclination to sit down in prayer and meditation and put light around this team, not only all of us, but this scientist who I am not at liberty to name, but you can sort of visualize him. He's a very brilliant man who works in a classified program that he's a civilian, but he cannot do anything without the people in his direct command permitting him to, and now they are saying go and do it. And whoever had been stopping him exactly a year ago, after we had this several days of meeting here at my farm in Virginia with the board of the Orion Project, have now stood down and backed off the suppression. And actually he was brought back into the country about 5 months earlier than we thought, and is ready to go. So this is potentially a huge breakthrough. And
I'd like to point out to people, I don't know if people thinking about this, see the irony in this whole thing. Our federal government right now is proclaiming to spend billions of dollars trying to solve, quote, the energy problem, supporting biofuels, clean coal, and we've all seen the information in the public press and what have you. And we're being told that the Obama's administration is extremely interested in solving this energy problem, supporting breakthrough energy technologies, et cetera, et cetera. And yet here is a man who works for the government and is being prevented from using his skills and information and knowledge to help this cause when he's one of the most brilliant people in this area. So there's a certain irony here that the government, and that part of the reason is, of course, is that the government is not monolithic. It's many fiefdoms and fiefdoms, I should say, and separate groups working on with different agenda.
Right.
And so it's ironic that they have somebody in their midst, and there's probably many people like that who could solve the energy problem, quote, energy problem, very rapidly.
Well, the irony is a couple things. One is the left hand often doesn't know the right hand, even if
yes.
And secondly, if they find out, someone will come in and flat out threaten people. And this gets to this moral courage issue again. Who has the moral courage to step out with science and technologies that would completely make redundant and unnecessary all the oil, all the coal, all the central utilities, all the nuclear power plants, all of this? This is not a trivial issue, and that is not the only reason why the UFO issue has been kept secret, but it's a big part of it because it's what runs the world. It's what runs the entire U.S. and industrialized economy. And there are only about 200 or 300 families and corporations that benefit from this, but they happen to have literally over half of the world's net worth under their control, these 200 or 300 families and corporations. So I think that when you look at that, and then you look at the discretionary, not the entitlement programs of the U.S. government, like Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security, but the actual discretionary budget of the United States, and then you take away what's being spent is considered almost an entitlement in the Department of Defense and the intelligence community of pushing $1 trillion. There's very little discretionary money. And so when you look at Congress and the president, everyone thinks, well, it's like this man that I know who was at a meeting with Jimmy Carter, and someone asked Jimmy Carter, what was it like being the most powerful man in the world? And he said, well, I don't think I was that man, is what Jimmy Carter said. And everyone was stunned. And they said, what do you mean? He says, well, there were things that I knew were going on and that existed that I didn't have access to. Apparently I didn't have a high enough clearance. And people kind of nervously laughed, and one person said, what do you mean, things like UFOs? And he said, yes, that and more, of course referring to these energy things, I'm sure. And I think that what people have to understand is that there are things that the chief executive, the president can do, as well as Congress, but they need to hear from you. They need to know that you're concerned about these things, you comprehend them, and that you're going to kind of have their back morally and also politically to support them. And then we have to hope and pray they make the right choices. In the meanwhile, something is afoot that this brilliant scientist has been brought back into the States 5 months early and is willing to basically go forward exactly where we left off a year ago. In fact, it's almost
talk about missing time
to the day. It's almost 12 months to the day that he resurfaced and is now wanting to get this proposal to us. We're waiting to receive it and review it. And now, I tell people, there's no question that in order to put this team together he needs to do this really advanced physics and science, it's going to be several $100,000, and people need to be prepared to help support us in that effort. But I think this is going to be one of our great best shots in moving forward, and I think that we'll keep you informed of how we're proceeding, but at least things are moving forward on something that had looked rather desperate after this man was yanked out of the country and threatened and basically was very, very worried about proceeding. Now he's very upbeat about proceeding and has an all clear. And I'm hoping that continues. We have to hope, and hope all of you will have that in your prayers and meditations for protection and that things stay on track. And also we'll support the OrionProject.org to the extent you can financially. Because, ironically, the United States government is spending tens of billions of dollars on these so-called new energy things, but they're all, I hate to use the word fraudulent, but in the sense that on the one hand, you have people who are on the U.S. government taxpayer payroll who have the kind of knowledge this guy has, and that the taxpayers are funding the research that's going on at Lockheed Skunk Works and the Phantom Works and at these facilities all over the United States where we already have anti-gravity and free energy things moving around. And on the one hand, we're going around saying, gee, maybe we can blow up a few more mountaintops in Appalachia and pull coal out of the ground and then burn it more cleanly. I mean, it's a schizophrenic policy, energy policy. But it's because these really super secret programs are seldom under the control of the policymakers on Capitol Hill or in the White House. And we're trying to be the bridge to that. And one of the ways that you can help us be that bridge is to write to the president, remind him of this briefing, and encourage him to have the moral courage to do the right thing and take these actions. And it's not just supporting these energy initiatives. A part of some of the other things that are in here have to do with the formation of a international global initiative to make peaceful contact with these extraterrestrial civilizations. Also, the standing down of the weaponization of space to the extent that it is mostly used for targeting these extraterrestrial vehicles by classified projects, which is a tragic and really it creates an existential threat to humanity. We're also recommending that they prepare the international community for the release of these technologies and begin looking at their implications and what have you, and that they work very closely with other governments as well as various agencies to prepare for a true new energy economy and all the changes that would attend that. And by the way, one of the reasons why these things are so hard to achieve is that a man that I met with a couple of years ago at the University Club in Washington, right near the White House, is a man who'd worked very closely with the Bush administration on nuclear power issues and is an attorney and a Harvard attorney. And he said to me, whether someone's liberal or conservative or progressive or green or whatever, once they get into power, they govern conservatively. And what he meant by that was not normal conservative, but like conservative as in no change. We don't want things to change. Because if you have a major game changer like this, it's so much change to manage that it's easier not to deal with it. In other words, it's sort of an inertia, and there's a certain momentum for the status quo to continue. But the status quo is destroying the biosphere and impoverishing 80% of the world's population. So it's an unsustainable momentum. And the inertia that goes with that and the difficulty for creating change on something this fundamental really requires the vision and the moral courage to do it. But they also need to hear from you. Those of you listening to the World Puja Network need to tell everyone on your email list, go listen to this interview with Dr. Greer and Dr. Loder, and then go to disclosureproject.org and read the brief and write to the president and write to the members of Congress and your two senators and say, look, we really do want action on this, and we're a constituent. Even those of you in other countries should do so to the president, and then also copy it to your leaders in your country, because the whole world has to come together on this ultimately. Ultimately, when you're dealing with interstellar civilizations, it can't be dealt with one country or one compartment in operation at a time. We're going to have to deal with this issue as a global community, as a global civilization. And that's a big step in and of itself that we need to take, and it's time for us to take it and to create a world where we can live together in abundance with justice and in peace, and to go into space peacefully and to create this whole new era of universal peace, which is really the era that's opening. That's really the big story of what's happening right now.
And the good news is that many of the people within government and private organizations who have wanted to keep this issue secret because of some of the very issues that Dr. Greer is speaking about right now have finally begun to realize that it cannot go on as we are for another 10 to 50 years or so, or more. The civilization will crumble because we're in a non-sustainable issue. So we're getting support for this change from a lot of different sectors right now. And the groups that we're trying to keep the secret, higher and higher percentages, well over 50%, are willing to start making the disclosure happen, and knowing full well that it's both not only the contact with extraterrestrial peoples, but it's also the impact on the whole energy issue that Dr. Greer has spoken of.
Right, and part of this too is that I think that one of the things we're learning is that there are members of the so-called Majestic Committee, 200 or 300 people who have kept a lot of these things secret and run these projects. That when I first briefed the CIA director in December of '93, I was told by two separate sources on the inside that only a third of them supported this notion of disclosure and bringing out this information. Now I'm told it's more like 60, 70%. Now, the hardliners are still very powerful and very lethal and not to be dismissed, but it's moving in our direction. And I think that what I'm hoping is that this president will have the moral courage to do the right thing in the secrecy, bring out these sciences, support what we're doing. In the meanwhile, you can make a difference by contacting them and encouraging disclosure, but also you can become an ambassador to the universe. We're asking people to come to these events and be trained, whether it's a one-day event like we're having this coming Saturday in Costa Mesa, California. You can see that at cseti.org. The lecture is the Friday night, Friday the 13th, but don't worry, I won't be there in a Halloween costume. But there will be that lecture, and then Jan Harzan with the Orange County MUFON group is co-sponsoring that at the Costa Mesa Community Center in Southern California. And then we're also going to be doing next year a number of these special events where we'll be doing workshops, and you can find out about those at disclosureproject.org and cseti.org, where we'll be in various places around the country and maybe perhaps in Europe. We're still looking at the possibility of that. And to train people. But in the meanwhile, you can get this new book, which has all the information. It has a DVD that shows all the kinds of contact that's happened, and about 19 years of a summary of all the experiences of our team, and it's called Contact Countdown to Transformation. It just came out, and you can get that at disclosureproject.org, and it comes with this free DVD that has the crop circle tones and the tones from the ETs that we've recorded in the field, as well as the events that have happened. And there is also a meditation, 2 sets of meditation CDs that help teach the contact protocols, and you can do all of that on your own if you can't make it to one of these training workshops and expeditions. So there's a lot that you can do just to empower yourself to make contact. And then, of course, you can also help support the OrionProject.org. So these are all things you can do to help us, and I thank all of you for your help and support. And I thank Dr. Ted Loder for being here all these years to help us with these projects.
Oh, it's been a pleasure, Steve, and I want to thank all the supporters out there as well. There's a lot of things that people can do, just small things, but every bit helps. And thank you, everybody, for your help.
Well, I think our time is up, and again, I'd like to thank the people of the World Puja Network for allowing us to have this show every 2 weeks, and I'd like to thank Dr. Loder for joining me. And you've been listening to Conversations with Dr. Stephen Greer, and until next time, have a good day and keep moving forward. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good night.